Sexual Conservation and Regeneration by Kenneth S. Guthrie, MD, PhD, from his book Regeneration. The word regeneration bears interesting connotations. Among the Jews, and later among the Christians, it designated that ceremony of lustration called baptism. It symbolized the washing away of sins, and the return to a life of pristine purity. This is, however, only the expression, in religious dialect, so to speak, of the scientific formula of perfect adaptation of the organism to all laws of its environment, physical, psychical, and spiritual. In either of these phraseologists, however, the term regeneration has a marvellous fitness. Consequently, the science of regeneration may be substituted for the more indefinite art of life. Taken strictly, this new term includes the intelligent guidance of all natural functions of the organism, but it will be restricted here to the guidance of the generative function, inasmuch as the latter forms perhaps the most important part of it, and is to be the subject of the following considerations. In this connection, it is very important to point out two meanings of the word sterility. In one sense, both the castrate and the normal self-contained men are sterile. Also, he who is impotent from any natural physical defect. The latter does not enjoy the normal strength of the anabolism of growth. Consequently, his normal resultant anabolism need not be higher than the vitality of the normal man who indulges in reproduction. The castrate will, likewise, be free from the opportunities of catabolic indulgence, but his anabolic metabolism will be confined to the physical anabolism of the growth of his tissues by absorption of suitable foodstuffs. On the contrary, the normal man who is sterile because self-controlled will increase in vitality both because free from opportunities in dangerous catabolism and because of enjoying to the fullest measure all possible anabolism, not only of the physical body, but indirectly through the resorption of the seminal fluid and of the increase of all vital powers. To many persons, the absolutely self-contained man is only an ideal, like the wise man of the Greek philosophers. They will not, however, deny that some men have catabolic seminal crises, voluntary or involuntary, oftener than others, and that one and the same man, at different ages and at will, in a certain measure, can increase or decrease their frequency. This process being an admitted fact, it is only necessary to imagine it carried on to a point in which, as is the case with many men in excellent health, these catabolic crises are an inappreciable quantity that can be ignored. This ideal, to some in actuality, will be sufficient to answer as groundwork for the above arguments. As a rule, unmarried men who preserve themselves pure possess a keenness or edge of perception, which they lose after marriage. The chaste man possesses a brightness of the eyes, smoothness of the skin, a firmness of the muscle, a magnetism of personality, a clearness of thought that is in exact opposition to the phenomena attending onanism, and in a less degree of normal exercise of the sexual function. Therefore, it may be expected that the man who controls all loss of the gon, or seminal fluid, will heighten the tides of his vitality to the very maximum of which his organism is capable, up to the very limit of his possibilities. He attains this height not necessarily by increasing the quality and quantity of his food, since his organism is not able to assimilate more than a certain amount of it in normal conditions, but by preventing all catabolic crises, of which the most common, and the most serious, are the emission of the semen. A slight digression may perhaps illustrate the subject under discussion. It is an unaccountable fact for physiologists such as Foster, who are strict uniformitarianists, that if an organism be fed with exactly the amount of food sufficient to balance the excrements and the increased weight of the body, the organism starves. In other words, the organism needs, in order to remain at the same weight, more incoming energy than appears to leave the body. Now, if Foster were a strict analogical thinker, it would be perfectly patent to him that a leak must exist somewhere. If the body remains the same, and more energy enters the body than leaves it, and the law of conservation of energy be believed, there can only be one conclusion: that somewhere there is an escape of energy, at any rate in a form which can be analysed in the test tube, or weighed in the balances. This leak of energy is the sexual function. Either the food particles are condensed in the gon, semen, or if none escapes, it is then transmuted into psychophysical form. This is a new form of energy to be added to heat, electricity, light, and other known forms of it. To return to the subject under discussion, it is in this manner that the human being is at a great advantage over all animals. These only breed during certain seasons, and during the rest of the year are enforced virgins. Man, on the contrary, can use his sexual function all the year round, with greater fertility, however, at the lunar periods. Yet at no time is his self-control involuntary. What he attains is therefore wholly due to his own power, and he can control himself all the year round if he pleases, while the animals at the breeding season do not have sufficient intelligent self-control to prevent them from seeking sexual intercourse. The resorption. Jozan puts the alternative very clearly. Choose between sexual relations and nocturnal and diurnal pollutions, but speak not of continence. Leave vows of chastity to angels. The man swears to be chaste does not know the extent of the agreement with himself that he assumes. He would be less daring if he knew that he was swearing to stop an organic circulation over which the will have no mastery. There is no question but that permanent impotence, which is not to be imputed to moral causes, or age, or the state of the organs, we repeat it, must be due to daily and insensible losses. Jozan, Empuisement Premature. It is a strange fact that although many authorities imply the existence of a resorption, they do not realize the formal existence of such a process. Hermann, for instance, who never speaks of a resorption, says, "If it, the sexual secretion, does not reach the usual destination, the female ovaries, it disappears. In this manner, it brings about the sharing of the male sex in the resources of the fruit. A resorption has been found in System, and in a young ram, by Schweger, a resorption which is a granular decay of the little seed bodies. Besides, Kehrer has conducted experiments with rabbits by constriction of the vas deferens. He found that, about 40 days in the not constricted end of the vas deferens, that the sperm was still normal, but without motion. After 5 or 6 months, the seed had disappeared in the sexual organs, and was in process of decay in the vesicles. Even Jozan assumes a resorption when he is off his guard. Treating of cases of obliteration of the epididymis and vas deferens, he says, "The seminal fluid, although it is yet secreted in this case, having no issue, is resorbed, as blood in a closed vessel would be resorbed. The individuals affected with such an obliteration are unfruitful, but not impotent. There is an enormous difference between these two situations, in respect to general health and exterior appearance of this category of pathological cases. It would seem that all communication of the testicles with the seminal vesicles having been interrupted, the man should be considered castrated, and bear the signs of that condition, that is, that the hair of the chin and of the member should fall, that the voice should assume the shrill tone of an old woman, that the muscles should become soft, and the forms rounded." It is not so. Even if the testicles, although useless, exist in the body of the man, he will preserve all the exterior signs of virility. That is, the beard, the low voice, the angular form of the members, the firmness of the muscles. Circulation. In the former section, it was seen that it was a natural process, that everything which was not used was resorbed by the lymphatic ducts. Spermatoza, as well as mere secretions of the parts of the vas deferens, the lymphatic ducts abounding near the vas deferens, and the seminal vesicles. What becomes of this resorbed matter? The answer is not far to seek. The same destiny awaits this as the absorbed food products from the intestine, namely, to be poured into the blood by the large lymphatic duct immediately after it leaves the heart. The destination of the resorption is then the blood. Under these circumstances, it becomes easy to see how the developments of the testicles can affect the usual virile changes of puberty. The blood nourishes the tissues of the muscles and makes them firm. It nourishes the tissues of the vocal cords and the roots of the hair of the chin and genital member. Besides, its presence after puberty as much determines the vigour and power of what Guazet speaks, as much as its absence permits the weakness and diseases which are proverbial, or the absence of the signs of virility in the cases of eunuchs. The fact that the natural resorption of the gon cemententus the blood is proved by the fact of the great strength of the brown Sequard testicular injection when injected into the blood directly, and of its comparative uselessness when injected into the ingnus or taken into the digestive tract through the stomach. In these cases, it must still make the round through the lymphatic system, which is avoided by the direct subcutaneous injection into the blood. The nervous system. The blood nourishes, however, not only the muscular skeleton, but also the nervous centers. Consequently, besides nourishing the muscles and determining the signs of virility, the rich regenerate blood feeds the nervous centers and imparts to them its dynamogenetic properties. The influence of the regenerated blood on the nervous system is asserted by Guazet and Jozan. Guazet, experimenting with direct injection into the blood of testicular secretion, reports such nervous improvement, as also Brown-Sequard himself, in 16 cases mentioned particularly some of which considerably at length. But Guazet's most important contribution is in regard to several cases of leprosy. From a physiological standpoint, therefore, these facts yield an incontestable and decisive proof of the most energetic action of the spermatic fluid on the spinal cord, Jozan. Jozan details some cases in which escarids produce the reciprocal influence of the genital organs and the brain, both in sleep as well as in the waking state. Continence and longevity. Noiret devotes many pages to show that continence prolongs life, and incontinence hastens old age. So the canary, according to her view, if permitted to raise offspring yearly, lives not more than 8 or 10 years, while the celibate bird has survived 22 years. Guazet details minutely 4 cases of simple senility in which injection of testicular secretion caused a return to the virile age. Similar experiments have been made and reported by Loomis and Hammond of New York, Brainerd of Cleveland, Dehoux of Paris, Gregorchou of Bucharest, and Villeneuve of Messiles. Brown-Sequard had the case of senility in view in beginning the practice of using his vaccine, and he expresses himself thus on the subject. The idea which has guided me in these experiments was that the weakness of old age depends largely on the diminution of the activity of the spermatic glands. I believe, and still believe, that the facts which I have published prove that the vigour of the nervous centres and of other portions of the organism is bound up with the swiftness of the testicular secretion process. This granted, it would seem natural that in adding to the blood of an old man by subcutaneous injections a fluid extracted from the testicles of young and vigorous animals, it would be possible to supply the insufficiency of his own spermatic secretion process and to increase the activity of that process. Vitality. The 2 proofs from castration and old age may be supplemented by a third, one which appeals to every person, by virtue of forming part of his experience. It should not be hard to judge of the importance of the sperma from the effects of the retention of it and of ejection of it contrasted. 1. The pathological effects of the loss of sperma is well seen in the well-nigh hopeless ravages of onanism or masturbation. They are so terrible that it is both impossible and indecent to recount them. Over the gate of their domains may well be written, "All hope abandon, ye who enter here." Words are too weak to portray the evil, and its frightful universality is well instanced by the innumerable advertisements of quack nostrums for its cure. Yet, the following words of Mercier, the noted psychiatrist, may not be out of place here. The function of reproduction has, by its very nature, deteriorating influence upon the organism in which it occurs. Down at the bottom of the scale of life, in the simplest organism, reproduction is affected by fission, in the case of Gregorina. The performance of reproduction is attended by the entire destruction and disappearance of the parent. The individual ceases to exist as an individual and exists only in the offspring. In higher animals than man, the whole life of the parent is not lost, but a part of it is lost. Hence the reproductive act has an effect on the highest regions of the nervous systems, which is of the nature of a stress and tends to produce disorder. In the male, the repeated loss of energy eventuates in a state of energy, apathy, lethargy, and dementia. The tension of energy in the nervous system is reduced to the lowest ebb, and all the manifestations of the existence of this energy are wanting or are exhibited in a feeble and perfunctory shape. The condition is one of dementia. There is want of mind, the inability to perform mental operations of even moderate difficulty, the dullness and slowness of feeling, the loss of all higher emotions, and of many of the lower ones also, that characterizes dementia. There is the deficiency of movement, the absence of muscular exercise, the inability to make exertions that are at all prolonged or continuous, the general degradation of conduct, the loss of all the higher attributes of humanity, and the retention of all the lower and more animal characteristics. Such are the results of the indulgence of the sexual passion in great excess. When the indulgence is less excessive, the degradation is less profound, but in every case there is degradation, and in every case the deterioration is of the nature of dementia. That is to say, it is a manifestation of deficiency in the amount of stored energy. Besides those cases in which the dementia so produced is sufficiently pronounced to incapacitate the wretched individual for the duties of life, and to render it necessary to commit him to asylum care, there are an enormous number of cases, forming together a considerable proportion of the total population, in which premature decadence of the mental powers, premature exhaustion of the energies, premature inability for vigorous and active exertion result from excessive sexual indulgence in early life. The young man, full of vigour, boiling over, as it were, with energy and activity recently loosed from the restraint of school or college, unaccustomed to control himself or to deny any gratification, launches out into excesses which at the time appear to be indulged in with impunity. But sooner or later comes the day of reckoning. He has felt himself possessed of abundant energy, and he has dissipated it lavishly, feeling that after each wasteful expenditure he had more to draw upon. But he is in the position of a spendthrift who is living on his capital. Had he husbanded his resources and lived in moderation, the interest on his capital would have sufficed to keep him in comfort to old age. But he has lavished his capital, living a few short years in great profusion, and before middle life, he is a beggar. Mercier, sanity and insanity. There seems no need to enumerate the manifold diseases which are due, or which follow in the train of ejections of the sperma in greater or less quantities. Farther, on facts bearing on this subject, will be detailed. For more, see Lallemande, Tissot, Jezan, and Goisset. 2. While the consequences of the loss of the sperma entails such dread consequences as are detailed above, it is impossible to trace a single disease to preservation and subsequent resorption of it. Nocturnal emissions. There is no question but that in normal cases a fair state of health can be preserved with occasional losses, or rather, ejections of the semen. For the physiologist is not concerned with sociology, and the problem of the vital equilibrium is wholly dependent of the fact whether the ejected sperma is wasted by a nocturnal pollution during sleep, during a purposive waste during waking hours, or whether it be introduced to the uterus of a woman not legally and socially married, or into those of a woman legally called a wife. The important point is that the sperma is ejected through the urethra, or the penis. Two persons who are content with this fair advantage of health, and who consider it static, there is no reason why they should not be satisfied with it. But for those persons who are seeking the highest state of vitality possible to them, and who realize that if all losses, whatever, through whatever causes, be avoided, there is for them a possibility of an ever-increasing vitality, a dynamic, developing evolution, which ultimately lead to the mastery of their higher facilities over their lower ones, of the mind over the body, and the spirit over the mind, then for them this indifferentist doctrine is not sufficient. They will insist on preserving every drop of their precious sperma, permitting it naturally to be reserved, assuring them first of a perfect physical body, next of increased mental faculties, and finally, if they progress, and the highest nervous centres be nourished and developed, the full development of the spirit. The value of the sperma can be judged of by this, that the subcutaneous injection of only a cubic centimetre of testicular secretion has in many cases brought back comparatively lasting health to old men, as Goisset shows. The onanist and masturbator and the profligate are not so much criminals as fools, demented minds, who, for the sake of an ever-decreasing pleasure, are either wasting or using to the lowest possible uses the most concentrated form of their vitality, and, in a very real sense, their very eternal destinies. The discovery of brown Sequard is remarkable in nothing more than in this, that it has been the successful agent in curing diseases of the most varied kind, except where serious organic lesions existed. The very number of these diseases which the injection of testicular secretion has cured shows that this remedy is not a specific for any one disease. The fact is that these injections merely heighten the tides of life and assist nature to cast off these diseases. This does not seem very far-fetched, when it is remembered that daily we take into our body by food, drink, or breathe germs of the most serious diseases, which, however, are harmless so long as the constitution is strong enough to cast them off. But why should a man inject into himself the testicular secretion of animals when he could preserve his own and keep his body continually at the highest point of vitality? In view of this, it would not be too much to say that, if a man were absolutely continent, he would be free from all diseases, and more or less so in proportion as he is not quite continent. This thesis is proved by the reverse of the above process, mentioned above, where it was seen that all manner of diseases, corresponding generally in remarkable degree to the above list, followed spermatic ejection more or less according to its amount. This is an appropriate place to discuss the question of the kind of secretion which is most available and useful. Was it operated with the extracts from monkeys, dogs, rams, guinea pigs, goats, horses, bull, hare, and cat? The guinea pig was the best in many respects, especially because easily procured. But, besides this, an experiment is recorded with human sperma, which was as successful, if not more, than the experiments with the animal extracts. But if the human sperma is as good, if not better, why should not each man preserve his own, instead of wasting this and then procuring other by repulsive and brutal means? Instead of painful injections, why not permit the natural painless process to proceed in the order which nature mapped out for man? The possibility of regeneration. The above considerations suggested that, in order to attain the highest state of health, it was advisable to store up and preserve all the genital secretion. But it is doubtful if this result ever occurs in a natural life. Spinsters and bachelors, innocently of any illicit intercourse, generally lose whatever gone is beyond the actual immediate needs of the body. It is then only in a spiritual, earnest, determined life that a man may earn the power to preserve it. But those who are not spiritual, discouraged by the continual failures of the natural life, ask, is it possible to accomplish this end? There is no reason why this should be impossible, for the generative function is par excellence of all the vital functions of the body that one most directly under the control of the mind. A lascivious thought is sufficient to awake the very depths of desire. It would seem that by merely avoiding such excitation of these instincts, the wasteful losses would be of themselves reduced to the minimum. There is some good authority for this theory. Richard says, women who live in absolute chastity, far from any erotic excitation, find that their menses finally become so very limited that they hardly make any spots on the cloths. On the contrary, women given up to enjoyment and prostitution find that the flow becomes very abundant and lasts from 10 to 15 days. Half of their existence is one long menstruation. This is true not only of women, but also of men. It is possible for all men, if they so desire, to gain such control over their nervous centres so as to repress ejection of the semen, and to preserve continence absolute. Of course, those men who suffer from involuntary and unconscious losses during waking hours have the hardest battle to fight, but few are in this condition who have not themselves to blame for it, and are very seriously sick. Most men can repress their passions and become perfectly continent, if they so desire. Of course, it is as well to count the cost before beginning the struggle. Pleasure and self-indulgence, physical luxury, and abandonment to comfort must be given up. Is this price too heavy for perfect health? Yet, nothing less than this will purchase it, and nature cannot be deceived or defrauded. Pleasure on the one hand, and happiness on the other. Each man must choose for himself. Unprejudiced observation of facts will show that some men suffer from losses of semen voluntarily or involuntarily much more frequently than others. Some men may in fact be said to be absolutely continent when compared with others. It is therefore neither an impossibility nor something unreasonable to demand that the losses should by control of the will be reduced as much as is actually the case in other men. The greater continence, the better. Greater continence is better than less continence, while absolute continence is still better than great continence. Absolute continence is not a state wholly dissimilar in nature from incontinence. It is only the one extreme of a process which has its complementary extreme in self-indulgence. Judicious development of willpower and physical endurance will infallibly have an effect on the state of health, and will gradually turn the tides of life in the desired direction. Perseverance will then alone be needed to fulfill ultimately the desired effect, even if a man who is struggling is not successful in attaining the aim and perfection of the development. Every increase of continence will increase his vitality just so much, and make him more able than he ever was to attain the very end of his desires. It is impossible to insist too much upon the fact that absolute regeneration is not an imaginary ideal, or an unrealizable ultimate. It is possible to all those whose will has acquired the necessary inhibition over the ganglionic nerve centers. It is possible to all who are irrevocably determined to attain it. This belief of such a possibility is easy to him who does not give himself the trouble of verifying it by his own experience. But such belief is worth nothing. Only he who scientifically experiments has any right to say anything in the matter, and his word alone carries with it any authority. That it is not impossible is patent when men can be pointed out who live among us who have attained this self-mastery. Experience is the highest test, and all inquiries in the matter are invited by a truth to satisfy themselves as to the credibility of the matter.